maybe it'll start to ring eventually. There it goes. When you have a negative 5 over 0, this is called undefined. So it's kind of like no solution, except we're not solving for something. So I'm not trying to find x. So if I was trying to find x, then there might be no solution. But we call this undefined. The value doesn't exist. You can't divide by nothing. And if you ask Alexa, she'll kind of give you a little bit of information about that, talking about Cookie Monster having no friends. Does anybody know that one? That's 0 divided by 0, I think, is if you ask Alexa to do 0 divided by 0. She'll give you. Is it Siri? Not Alexa. Siri, thank you. So you can kind of get a little description with Cookie Monster and not being able to divide it up into any friends. The other two problems talk about using the reciprocal. Number 4 says, what is the reciprocal of 1/3? Ava, what is the reciprocal of 1/3? 3. You flip to find the recip. So flip it, you get the reciprocal. Ava, number 5 says the opposite reciprocal. What's that mean?
I did -4 over 3.
Yeah, -4 over 3. Thanks. So you flip it, and opposite means the opposite sign. There you have it. So if you look down below, a little bit about slope. Slope, remember, is rise over run. It's the movement of the graph, and we use m to represent slope. So how does the graph increase, or how does it decrease? How is it moving? And a little bit of review here. The algebra form of slope is that y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. We call that the change in y over the change in x. So how is the vertical distance changing? How is the horizontal distance changing? And then again, you got that little picture there, that rise over run. So underneath, I believe there is a problem, or two. One problem that wants you to find the slope between the points 1, 3, and 6, 7. So we're going to use the little slope formula. The first point is always your x1, x or y1. The second point would be your x2 and your y2. And then you're plugging it into the formula that's listed above. So change in y over change in x. Leah, what numbers would get plugged in for this slope?
7 minus 3 over 6 minus 1.
And that gives you 4/5. Should you change that to a decimal? No. We actually need slope to be a fraction because I need a number to rise, I need a number to run. So it has to be written as a fraction so I know how high and how over to go. So if you look at the next group of problems, kind of describes how we can classify a line. There are actually 4 different ways a line can be graphed. And based off of what the slope is, that tells us the type of line that we have. So the slope of a line indicates whether the line increases from left to right, just like you read a book, we read a graph. We start on the left, the graph moves to the right. Decreases from left to right is horizontal or vertical. So those would be our 4 different cases of a line. So it could increase, go up, it could decrease, go down, it could be horizontal or vertical. The slope indicates whether the line rises, falls as horizontal or vertical, depending on what value you give for the slope. So the first one says if you have a positive slope, that means the slope is greater than 0, it's going to rise. So if the slope is bigger than 0, your graph will rise. If it's negative, it's going to be less than 0, and that makes it fall. So positive slope rises and negative slope falls. If the slope is 0, then we have a horizontal line. And if you think of the slope as being the horizon, and here's my green sun today, should have switched it. A 0 slope is like the sun, that's my 0, kind of coming up over the horizon or falling below the horizon. But a lot of people forget that a 0 slope means a horizontal line. The last one is that undefined slope. And that's when I have some number over 0. So when you have something, I just put a 5 there, over 0, it's undefined. And we can write that as UND instead of writing that whole thing out. And that was when we have a vertical line, because I'm rising 5, but we're not moving left or right, and that's what creates the vertical line. So underneath, there's a couple of problems that ask you to classify the slope. So see if you can find the slope of these lines without graphing this, and then decide what's going on with the slope. So is it rising, is it falling, is it horizontal or vertical? So I need to see you plugging the numbers into the little formula and then calculating the slope. Careful with those double negatives in there, the minus negative. Michael, what'd you get for the first one?
5 over.
And what would you say about a slope? That's 5 over 7. What kind of line would we have?
Positive.
A positive line. So it rises. So a positive line means my graph rises. Stephen, how about number or letter B? What do we have there?
0.
Undefined, because we have a 3 over 0. Make sure you're saying that it's undefined. Don't leave it like this. And Stephen, if it's undefined, what type of line do we have? A straight up and down line. It's vertical. Questions? The last concept we're going to talk about with slope would be the fact that if I have 2 lines, the lines could be parallel or perpendicular, and I can determine that by also using the slope. So it says the parallel lines, the lines are parallel if and only if they have what? Why are lines parallel, Peter? They have the same slope. So you see 2 lines. One line, L1, would have a slope of M1. Line L2 would have a slope of M2. They must be equal. What happens with perpendicular lines? So if we have perpendicular lines, Ava, what happens with those?
Opposite.
Yeah, they have to be opposite and then reciprocals. Which is why we had that one little fraction that you were asked to take the opposite reciprocal of that. So underneath it says M1 would be equal to the opposite and then the reciprocal. If you multiply opposite reciprocals together, what number do you always get? Jake? Jack? Sorry. Say again?
1.
You're so close. So if I have 2/3 and I multiply that by -3/2, -1. Together, when you multiply them, they'll always be -1 because they're going to be opposites, so that's where that negative sign comes in. So if you flip the page, kind of just cruising through these little notes, it wants you to tell whether the lines are parallel or perpendicular by finding the slope of the lines. So you have 2 lines, see if you can find the slope of those 2 lines. You can do this one, and then there's one more underneath it. So see if you can find the slopes of both of these, decide if it's parallel, perpendicular, and then do the last problem underneath. That's you. Nick, what'd you get for the first slope of line 1?
2.
So we have 5 minus negative 1. That becomes.
Oh, wait. I was looking for the thing.
That's all right. 6/5, and then the slope of line 2 would be
Negative 5/6.
-5/6. So what would you say about those two lines?
They're perpendicular.
Yeah, these are perpendicular. So opposite, one's negative, the other one's positive, they're reciprocals of each other. And then the very last one, again, tell whether the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Because maybe they're not the same, maybe they're not opposite reciprocals, they're just some other random line. So they don't always just have to be parallel or perpendicular. So there is that option for them to be neither one of those cases. So Gavin, what'd you get for the slope of the first line?
2 over 1.
Yes, so it would be 4 over 2 or just 2. And then the second one?
-1.
You're really close. So if you have 5 minus 6 and 22 minus 24. Yeah, so it's going to be a -1 over -2, which is a +1/2. What kind of type of lines are they then, Gavin? Do you know?
Parallel.
Are they the same?
Oh, no. They're neither.
Yeah, they're neither. So, ooh, I didn't mean to pick up the eraser. So we have a +1/2 and a +2. They're not the same. They're not opposites. Reciprocals. They're just reciprocals of each other. So this would be the case where they connect somewhere, but they don't connect perpendicularly. Any questions? So we have 9 minutes to get started on this worksheet. I think you'll be able to cruise through some of these pretty quickly. There is a problem that involves fractions. Make sure you keep them as fractions. I ask that you do this on a separate piece of paper, sorry. The answers are on the back to this assignment and the assignment you'll receive on Tuesday. So check those solutions on the back. See. No. So you do it just with your regular homework. So everybody does problems 21 and 22 as part of the regular homework. Chris is going to do them on a separate piece of paper and he'll present them on Tuesday. So get this homework started. There's paper next to Stephen if you need lined paper. Use the time that you have to get a couple of these done.